Hello, and welcome to Awkward Family Conversations, where we try to help Gen Z, Zoomers, and Millennials kind of figure this life thing out. I'm joined, as always, by my younger daughter, Addie. There she is. When Addie was in high school, we took a family trip to Montreal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Quebec, really. We wasn't just Montreal. And we spent 3 days biking the Petit Train du Nord. Sure, I mispronounced that badly, but it was very nice bike trail that used to be the railroad trail, that the railroad bed that had that supplied the rail service to the ski resorts of the Laurentian Mountains outside Montreal. We had a nice time, 3 days of biking, and we need to do another bike trip, I think, Addie.
I love that idea. That was one of my favorite vacations I've ever taken.
Yes, there was a lot of good family memories from that one. That's
yeah,
that was fun. But would love to do it again. So, hello, Ed.
Hey, Dad. As always, I'm here with my dad, Rhett, who you just heard talking. I don't know if this is still true, but it was true when I was in high school that if Rhett could eat one kind of food for the rest of his life, it would be pizza. Still
true.
That tracks. Is it still pepperoni mushroom?
That's my go-to, but I'm not averse to more and different ingredients. Nice. But they're the traditional ingredients. You'll find none of that Canadian bacon and pineapple stuff on my pizza.
Okay, Canadian bacon is garbage on pizza, but I will not have you slandering pineapple on pizza.
Well, pineapple on pizza, not good. I'm not a fan.
Pineapple pepperoni is the supreme combination of pizza toppings.
I'm going to have to disagree with you there. I'm pretty much a traditionalist. So I'm not a fan of olives either, or anchovies or anything salty like that. But
I mean, obviously, I don't eat anchovies on my pizza, but
olives
also.
Eat cheese on your pizza, so.
Well, I eat vegan cheese and vegan pepperoni. There's a wonderful vegan deli, I guess, that basically supplies every pizza restaurant in town. They make cheese and meat. So they make the vegan pepperoni that is crazy good. So the vegan pepperoni pizzas in Nashville, they're on another level.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, Nashville has a very good vegan dining scene, as you have discovered.
Yes. Yeah, that is a reason why I want to move to a big city, is because the vegan dining in Nashville is honestly hard to beat. It's significantly better than most of the East Bay.
Oh yeah. No, yeah, I think it's really good. Yeah.
San Francisco might have Nashville beat, but the East Bay definitely doesn't.
Yeah, there's a lot of ethnic restaurants that can be easily adapted to vegan. So.
Well, I mean, there's Golden Ears in San Francisco, and that is my favorite restaurant.
I did not know that.
So good. It's so good. It is all of the comfort food from my childhood veganified.
Very good.
All right.
What's the topic today, Ed? What are we talking about?
Today we're talking about my daily life, aka what is the big deal about chronic illness? Woohoo!
Yes, as we think about our life transitions, dealing with chronic illness is unfortunately something that many of us have to deal with. I have been blessed not to have it. I get migraines periodically, but those are hardly rise to the level of a chronic illness. It's 3 or 4 times a year I'm getting a migraine, but that's about it. You, on the other hand, and many people I know, suffer mightily. And chronic illness, I think, is a huge deal in our culture.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one. And there's not a lot of support, especially because usually if something is chronic, it's not localized to one thing. Like I have my digestive issues, but I've also got my joint issues, and I get my migraines, and that leads to all sorts of hormonal and skin problems. So it's a bunch of things, and there's not a good place to turn for like a doctor who does all of the things and also believes in COVID.
Yeah, well, I think, yes. I mean, what you've described is, particularly challenging because not only is it chronic, but it's not, I mean, because we have, there's people that suffer chronic back pain. I mean, they just have back pain all the time. Your uncle actually.
Relatable.
Yeah. And even though that's it's a single thing, at least the doctor has some sense, or the people who are treating him have, or people with back pain understand that that's the issue, is that there's damage and inflammation and but it's about the back. What you've described is a whole bunch of things that all go wrong at the same time, and so.
And many of my friends who have chronic illness problems are in a similar situation where it's at least usually like two separate systems. And it's hard to find a doctor because and I'm not a doctor, so I have no idea if I have like 6 different chronic illnesses or if I've got one big bad. But there's not a whole lot of support out there for dealing with chronic illness, especially not on a low salary. The testing tends to be extremely expensive, not covered by insurance, and difficult to get at all.
Yeah, I think you're talking about integrative medicine, where somebody has to take these different pieces together. And
not even necessarily. I was in $1,100 of debt from a colonoscopy.
I'm not talking about the expense part of it. I'm talking about the actual somebody to address it all.
Yes.
The expense part is part of a larger healthcare challenge that we have.
Absolutely, but yes, the integrative medicine thing is they're difficult to find. Like mentioned earlier, difficult to find one who also believes in COVID, because unfortunately there's been the anti-vax movement used to be very localized and niche and for weirdos. And then in the days of COVID, the integrative space got really invaded by a lot of very conservative rhetoric about government control and poisoning our bodies to keep us sick, which is not the case. That's not why vaccines exist. And it's very frustrating because that's not the belief system I ascribe to. So going to a doctor who does believe that is like, well, I'm not going to trust your medical opinions at all then.
Yeah, I think with the sort of the cutting edge medicines, and I'd put things like chiropractic and some of these other homeopathy and so you do get people who believe
homeopathy.
Well, you get people who believe in the the body's ability to heal itself and don't take a lot of intervention, and certainly not chemical or biological intervention. And I kind of I get it, and I generally feel that way myself, that if I can manage without taking medicine or without having a procedure, then I will. But there's a reason we have procedures, and there's an awful lot of relief that people get from medicines and procedures that make them very valid. And I think those bleeding edge or those cutting edge practices often attract people who've got a different view. If they had a traditional view of medicine, they'd be doing traditional medicine, but these people are choosing to blaze new trails and explore alternative medicines. And unfortunately, that comes with.
I'm going to draw a small issue with your use of traditional medicine, only because usually integrative medicine and herbalism and practices like those are deeply traditional. And what I think you're meaning to refer to is Western medicine.
Traditional
is typically what we refer to it in that community. And while I agree with a lot of what integrative medicine has to say, I got a stomach ulcer because someone prescribed me 4 pills of ibuprofen every 4 hours for a broken wrist. And I would rather deal with my pain with this. The supportive things that I would rather use are always herbs and something that's natural that I can grow myself, not something made in a lab. I'm not opposed to that, but there's plenty of side effects, and there's also a lot to be said for big pharma and government intertangling. But yeah, that is a big thing. And the more non-Western movements away from medicine is the complete distrust in anything that Western medicine produces, which is, I like a happy medium. I'm not an all or nothing kind of girl usually ever. Yeah, that's.
No, I agree. I've used a chiropractor extensively and find it to be really, really helpful for what I needed. And as I said, I tend to shun medicines when I can, but when I get my migraines, I'm taking aspirin, I'm taking my Excedrin because that works. And
Excedrin at this point, I'm gonna throw up in like 5 minutes.
Yeah,
it's super fun. I love it. I miss it. Excedrin is so effective.
It is. It works. And so but sort of keeping interventions to to a minimum degree is kind of where I think, but keeping the option open, because they do help and they do work, and everybody's got to find their own path. But getting back to kind of the question about COVID and some of these other practices, is if you're dealing with folks who are looking at medicine in different ways, they're going to be more likely to buy a narrative or agree with a narrative that says distrust government, distrust regulators, distrust.
Well, especially, and I can see where it's coming from in COVID, like during this time, because science disagrees often, and new information comes out that often contradicts old conclusions. So instead of understanding that is just the scientific process, and that's what happens with research, a lot of the backlash to COVID research has been, well, they don't know what they're talking about, and it's like, no, they do. They just know more than they did a couple months ago, and sometimes that's how it goes. Yep. But it's hard. I've felt, I hear people say often like politically homeless when they like want to smoke weed but hate poor people. But I feel very medically homeless often, because I kind of hate going to my primary care doctor, because when I go there and I'm like, I have these problems, he's like, here's the gastroenterologist, here's the respiratory doctor. And I'm like, I want help across the board, and you're the primary care guy. Like, can you help me?
Yeah, and
he doesn't. But then on the flip side is like, I tried to go to the integrative specialist, and I called them and asked what they were doing about COVID, because I haven't been quite right since I had COVID. So likely is a long COVID making things worse. And when I asked what they were doing for masks, they were like, oh, no, we're not requiring masks. We're not checking vaccines, which it's dismaying to hear, because it's like, on the one hand, I like their approach to medicine better, but the thing that's bothering me is what they are denying is real. And then on the other hand, I don't like the approach to medicine, but at least they come from kind of the same beliefs that I do. So it's this very, like, I don't really know where to go. And you've seen, like, I think it's 30% of COVID survivors who previously were able-bodied, normal, come out with some sort of long COVID disability. So we're seeing this increase in chronic illness in the United States without any sort of increase in support for sick people, or increase in accessibility to medicine or other types like alternative medicines. I've got my heat pad right now, and I'm gonna go smoke some weed to relieve my like body muscle aches. And you're not seeing as much, like, I don't know, discourse about the supportive actions we can be taking as a society. It's still very like, oh, if you're disabled, stay home, when it's like, no, we're looking at a 30% increase of people who are going to be disabled.
Yeah, well, and I get that. And I hear kind of two different things. One is access, which is an ongoing issue.
I know we both have lots to say about that, but I know we agree it too.
Well, yeah. No, I mean, it is. Yeah, I mean, healthcare is a limited resource. We don't like to think about it in that way, which is one of the reasons that I also feel like, I don't want to impose myself on a system that's already stressed if I don't have to. That's sort of the community-minded. My own beliefs too are that I do believe the body will heal itself given the chance. But again, my experience has been relatively healthy. I've been relatively healthy my entire life, and I haven't had any of these chronic situations.
Right, because that's one of the biggest things with autoimmune stuff too, is like, the body doesn't heal itself. The body is specifically preventing itself from healing when you have some sort of autoimmune disorder. Which, like, when something's wrong. Like, I've known that I have chronic problems for a while. I still don't have any good answers because stuff is expensive out here. But we're working towards it. Well, but I do agree with you, like, if you get a cut, it does heal on its own. The body is predisposed to heal on its own, but sometimes you need some extra help.
Sometimes you do, and you want to be able to take advantage of it, and you want to have access when you have those times. And certain people need more care, more intervention than others. And I recognize that I'm on the privileged side of the equation here, or of the population here, when it comes to healthcare. But the second thing that I think is important here, not to lose sight of, is that our ability as a large population to follow quickly developments is, it's limited. We can't quickly follow something. I mean, the development of COVID vaccines was incredibly unprecedentedly fast.
Yeah,
Still
it was
took,
amazing. Yeah.
still took a year. And so, you got COVID before you could get a vaccine. And, that's, and you got it 9-10 months after the first, sort of when it first came to prominence. And so the response, the medical response, and you made the point that, we learn things. Medicine is definitely a science and scientific process.
It is, yeah.
Scientific method takes time to evolve and to develop the knowledge and get the data points that can point a way. And while that's happening, of course, people are suffering. And so you've got this increase in long COVID sufferers, people who are suffering after having COVID. They're suffering in different ways. And that's another part of the thing, is that we don't understand. COVID affects a lot of different body systems in a lot of different ways. And so this isn't, chronic back pain. It could be any number of symptoms that come out. And we don't know enough to be able to say definitively that this is long COVID. I mean, there isn't really a test for long COVID to know, oh, that's what's happening. But we do know that people who have COVID, a third of them end up with longer term chronic illness that lingers. And so, obviously there's a relationship there, or it seems obvious to me that when you get a third of the people who've had it that, have different health outcomes after having it than before, that it's probably related to that, to the disease that they had. But it's going to take medicine a while to sort of sort this out so that they can come up with a treatment plan. And this is the integrative medicine piece. I think we're in the very early days of this, but I think you're going to see more and more resources put into that as doctors, as researchers start to understand better how body systems interact with each other. I mean, our Western medicine, traditional medicine, whatever, the medicine that we're used to dealing with in our country is very used to treating symptoms specifically,
Yes.
And they're not good at sort of the holistic type approach.
It's symptoms, and it's systematic too. You don't have, I can't go to my gastroenterologist and be like, hey, I'm having these really bad stomach problems that are causing me to break out. What can I do about that? They're going to be like, I got a dermatologist I can refer you to, which
yeah, but there's nobody
that's
saying
not super helpful.
How do the systems interact with each other, so that is my stomach ache triggering a skin response?
Whereas when I went to the integrative specialist and we talked about that kind of thing, it was like your forehead, it tends to correlate to your digestive system. So if you're breaking out in your forehead, there's probably something wrong in your GI tract. And how to treat that, what herbs can I take? I've been drinking a lot of dandelion tea recently because it's really good for your liver. And I've been having really bad breakouts, and I heard that dandelion tea is really good for soothing skin breakouts too. And within a week of drinking dandelion tea every day and keeping up with a skincare routine that's got all sorts of crazy fucking chemicals in it, I didn't say anything, that's crazy. My skin's gotten back to normal. So it's kind of like I have yet to see a complete holistic approach change my life, or a complete Western medicine approach change my life. Like even when I was a couple years ago, when it was really bad and we went through the whole integrative thing, I was still on a prescription for fluconazole for the month. So it's a team effort between the two, and I'm dismayed to see an increase in you either do this or you do this, and there's no in between happy place. And I found very few people in that in between happy place with me.
Yeah, and that'll be the case until you start to get results that people can pay attention to and believe that, oh, this will solve problems, because and it may stay niche, but that will only be because they're not able to demonstrate satisfactorily to attract more people to recognize, oh, this can work. And this is the great human experiment that we're involved in. We need, or we feel we need, simplicity. We don't, because complexity requires work. It requires examining and mining layers for meaning and for understanding. And it's just, and we have limited resources. We can't, Daniel Kahneman, we're back to Thinking Fast and Slow, tremendously important book that I read many years ago, by Daniel Kahneman. He won the Nobel Prize for, I think, for economics, but it's all around decision theory. It's how we as people make decisions, and we either make them very quickly and intuitively and almost unconsciously, using data that's available to us. And when we don't have enough data, we substitute data through a lot of different means, which can create bias and therefore mistakes in our decision making. Or we have these very involved, very resource intensive analyses that we do that consume all of our available attention and energy. And we can't live in system 2 because it's so resource consumptive. And complexity puts us into system 2. So we kind of resist that when we can. If I can have my system that is easy, my unconscious, totally automatic system on, then I don't have to think. I don't have to employ resources to, discern differences in meanings and parse, issues and see not conclusive data, but still make a point. I mean, if I can avoid that path, I will, and I'll do it, almost unconsciously, or in many cases unconsciously. And that relates just as much to, jobs and relationships as it does to, our interactions with medicine. One of the issues that I have, I'm a capitalist and I believe in the free markets, but I also believe in a very strong regulatory hand, because
you're Keynesian.
Well, yeah, I am, because I do believe that the market will, everybody making individual decisions will get us the most effective and most efficient use of resources, which is really what an economy is about. How do you use your resources communally?
Indeed.
But the challenge is that the laissez-faire capitalism is that you can't be an expert in everything. I mean, I can't be an expert in my TV and in my microwave dinners and in my carpet and in my car and in my gasoline that I put in my car. I mean, to be an expert in any of those things, to be able to make a fully informed decision, I have to sit there and think a lot about it. I have to gather information. I have to, process information, synthesize it, evaluate it, and make decisions. And I can't do that. So I am at the mercy of marketers. I am at the mercy of, people who write reviews. I start to look for third parties that I can trust to tell me, so I don't have to educate myself on what's my health. You
and I both are at the mercy of spreadsheets.
Well, I mean, spreadsheets is a way to organize information, right? But what you put into those spreadsheets,
I get all the information to put on my spreadsheets from other people's spreadsheets.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, and that's how we do research a lot of time. We're not doing primary source research, right? We have to read other people who are doing it, and that's why we have peer-reviewed journals for things that are really important, like healthcare. But vaccines. But I think one of the big challenges for healthcare, and it's not just healthcare, it's really our whole system, is that whole culture and our whole economy is that we can't all be experts at everything. And so, as healthcare evolves, like all of our communal systems evolve, we're going to see more attention paid where there's results. And I think as integrative methods, as you get people with chronic illnesses and you get people sort of not willing to suffer in silence anymore, and you get these chronic illnesses that involve more than one system. So, we've kind of got our simple, we'll call it simple, although it's certainly has a huge impact, chronic back pain. Is a discrete set of problems, but then you've got the more involved, like your situation, where you've got several different systems involved, and there's no person to who understands all of them and understands how they relate to each other, because that work hasn't been done yet. We haven't done the research to see how the skin system interacts with the digestive system.
And I mean, there's also lots to say about medical sexism and medical fat phobia too. In that same situation, is that most medicine trials in Western medicine are done with exclusively male, the word trial people, male subjects. There it is. And I'm not one to be like, there's two types of bodies. But that does create issues, especially because I talked to grandma, your mom, about her migraines, because I started getting really bad migraines when I turned 18, and like started going to college. I started getting these migraines. And when I talked to her about it, she was like, yeah, it took me several doctors before anybody admitted that it could be related to my menstrual cycle. And now that's just commonly accepted knowledge, that if you regularly get migraines and you're a woman, it's probably related to hormones.
Yeah.
But that's now accepted. But when, you know, grandma was going to doctors 40 years ago, it took her to get to a neuroscientist before anybody admitted that maybe estrogen does have something to do with it.
Yeah. Well, and that's true. And you'll see, I mean, and I think, yes, well, yes, most of the concluded research is included mainly male subjects. That's changing. I mean, the medicine's aware of that now. And, you know, even drug companies in their desire for profits are going to start paying attention to half the population that they hadn't paid before.
Well, I mean, yes and no, but I'm still like, it might be happening. I'll admit I don't know much about the drug trials that have been going on in 2022. But back in 2019, when I got on Zoloft and I had the horrible back spasms and throat spasms that were related to the medicine, because there's nothing else that could have triggered it, there was no documented research that could be a side effect. So I was like, of course it's not. I looked into it more, and there were plenty of experiences, blog posts, comments from women who were saying, this happened to me on Zoloft. And nobody has put that on any medication for women, that like, hey, you could have like this really bad reaction with this. But that's not being studied at all, because it's women. It's the same thing with a lot of digestive issues. Usually it's women suffering from them. So like the discrepancy is bigger. And then you've also got long COVID too, is a big one. People talk about symptoms of long COVID being like you lose your sense of smell and taste for a long time. Obviously that happens. But one of the bigger things for me was that this is awkward now, my menstrual cycle has not been consistent since I had COVID. I have not had a regular period. And there's no reason that should change. Like, I haven't changed my birth control. I have an IUD. So there's no hormonal changes going on every month. Everything is consistent all of the time. And I've talked to a lot of other women who have had COVID and are like, yeah, my menstrual cycle has not been the same. And so when I talked to my doctor about it and I was like, hey, this has been happening, he was like, oh, that's not a symptom of long COVID. And I was like, it kind of is though.
You've got anecdotal evidence that says it is, and you should probably trust anecdotal evidence to a degree, but you need to get into clinical trials and see it if this is the case. But there are no
clinical trials being done is the thing. Is like that's where medical sexism comes into play. Is that like a lot of stuff that only affects women it just isn't studied. It's not a priority. Like you saw with the birth control pill for men, where they were like, oh, we're not going to continue these trials because they're getting severe headaches, and we're like, we throw up every time we have to get on the placebo pill, and y'all said that wasn't big enough side effect to stop trials. Like, what is this?
Yeah. And yeah, don't mistake my encouragement that things are changing to say that they're perfect, right? I mean, they're better than they were, and our knowledge base is growing. And yes, I'm sure there's still sexism. I mean, all kinds of bias is built into all of our systems. And so, yes, we see it, but it is improving. And we're going to get better, and we're going to get more data. We're going to get more data points. And as I say, there'll be, a pharmaceutical company, well, they're already looking at women-specific issues because there's there's money to be made there, and they'll go find them. So, but, my overall point when we started this line of the discussion was really just to say that it takes time. Getting data, medical data in particular, takes time. And sadly, what that means is, we're only, we're 2+ years into this COVID epidemic, and we already know more about COVID probably than we knew about an awful lot of the diseases that are out there. And we still don't know nearly enough, like long COVID.
I mean, we know more about COVID than we ever knew about celiacs.
Yes. And, we've got a...
And most celiacs are women.
Yeah. But not all. I mean, but it's...
Not all, no, but there's definitely... Most of chronic illnesses that are like 70 or higher % women problems have next to no research done on them. Which is,
I believe that.
Medical sexism at work. But I mean, like, and I mentioned like medical fat phobia. I have plenty of fat friends who go to their doctor and they're like, my back hurts. And their doctor's like, lose weight. And they're like, that's not can you like can we at least do some x-rays to make sure there's not a problem there? And like, I've had friends who had undiagnosed kidney infections that turned into like a whole severe thing that ended up them in the ER because their doctor just said, no, lose weight, it's fine.
You're gonna have stories like that. People are gonna have experiences like that because we're dealing with people. Doctors are people, and they're gonna have their biases and they're gonna have their prejudices as well. On the other hand, talking to your uncle who was a public health doctor, obesity is a huge problem, and he will take every opportunity he can to tell people who are very overweight to lose weight, because that will increase health outcomes tremendously for them. Across a whole variety of things, because that extra weight is being maintained, and it comes at a high cost. And so I totally appreciate what you're saying. Doctors need to listen better, and they need to listen to the specifics, and they need to be a little bit more aware of how people feel, and also kind of understand what they can accomplish with each patient, which is hard.
Well, I mean, because ways to lose weight, like, it's not just like you can't just wake up and decide to lose weight one day. It takes dedication, and also having the right body type to be able to do that. Like, there's plenty of people who try very, very hard and don't get down to the size their doctor said they should be, because BMI is useless.
It's one measure, but it's not perfect by any means. Yeah,
but it's still used a lot. But one of the things too about like losing weight is like, when you're in chronic pain, exercising is not really feasible. Like, there are days I wake up and I'm supposed to go to the gym and I'm like, I can't bend my knees. Like, I can't go up and down my stairs. I can't go do push-ups.
No, you're right. And there's days that I wake up who I'm totally able-bodied. When I have a migraine, I'm not going to exercise. When I've got a pulled hamstring, I'm not going to exercise. I mean, I definitely get that. There's we have to adapt, and we're ultimately responsible for our own bodies, and we have to make it work for us. Trying to get the help that we need. And this is the thing. There's a quote that I really enjoy, which is kind of all an experiment of one, unless you're an identical twin, perhaps. But what
even
works for
still,
me is not necessarily going to work for you. But we do know, generally speaking, that a healthy lifestyle includes enough sleep, 30 to 60 minutes of moderate exercise a day, and a good diet. A good diet meaning well balanced between your proteins, your carbohydrates, your fats, and that they're.
But here's the thing: carbs are so good.
They are. They are. Well, that's what sugars are, right? And sugars are sweet. And we like sweet.
Love carbs. Favorite food group right there, carbs.
You're talking to a pasta and bread guy. I get it.
Yes. Pasta, bread, and candy guy right there.
And candy, sugar, right. Exactly.
Honestly, I got your palate. Wait, what?
Well, the thing is that nature has made sweets very hard to get. They've included them with fiber usually. When you find sweet in nature usually includes fiber, which is filling. So you can't really OD on sugar. But the way we process food now, we take it all out.
It's easier for me to eat a whole sleeve of Oreos than it is for me to eat 4 mangoes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I will eat 10 to 20 cuties in one sitting. But
I'll eat at least 3. Yeah, but
I remember, this is a tangent, but the first time that I bought cuties, that I was dating Eric, and then I sat down on the couch with my little bag of cuties, and he was like, "Why'd you bring the whole bag over?" And I was like, "Oh, you don't know yet what's about to happen."
Yeah, I do love the cuties. Those are tremendously, and
they are
great as they
so
don't
good.
Yeah, and they don't leave a lot of residue on your hands, which I really don't like about oranges.
Yeah, they're just easy to eat and delicious.
And they are very tasty, and they're actually loaded with good food or good.
I mean, you got vitamin C. That's the thing that I love about fruit. Like, it's good for you, and it's freaking good.
Well, I actually saw Robert Lustig, who is written quite prominently about metabolic issues. You talked about before about how not every person who's overweight is unhealthy, and he made that point. He says, really you need to look at, you need to look at each person sort of individually, and you get he says we used to call people like who were healthy but heavy, big boned and husky and those kind of things. But if you look at their muscle mass, they're You know, they don't have subcutaneous fat or whatever. You know, they've got some insulation, you know, on their belly, but it's not integrated into their muscles the way people who are unhealthy have fat in their muscles. But, you know, he's like, I don't know what the percentage, I forget, you know, 10 to 20% of people who are overweight are not unhealthy. This is just their body. But if you're doing the things in general, if you're getting that sleep at night, you know, 7.5, 8 hours sleep, if you're eating a healthy, well-balanced diet, whole foods, plant-based fats, lean protein.
That's my shirt. It says plant-based.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, no, really. If you're eating, if that's your diet, and you're getting this 30 to 60 minutes of exercise every single day, and again, not sweaty, hard intensity exercise, but just, you know, good walk. If you're able to do all of those things, your chances of being healthy go way, 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 way up. And
you hear that, Claire? You need to get 30 to 60 minutes of exercise a day.
Yeah, she may think 30 to 60 seconds, but she may be off on the time.
So I mean, well, Claire's at the stage of her life where she is the size she is.
Yeah. Well, that's often, you know, and I tell you what, if you're doing those three things consistently, you're going to be at the size you should be.
I mean, my girl's definitely getting enough sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not, that doesn't mean you're going to be, you know, you're not going to have chronic illness and you're not going to have things that are go wrong. But if you're able to do those things, and I think your point earlier was just you're compromised in your ability to live a healthy life when you have chronic illness. When you have this onset of a chronic illness, it just gets in the way of
one of the biggest things, and I would honestly say the big deal about chronic illness is a misunderstanding of what it is by everyone around you. Because chronic illness, while it is like, you know, a deeply personal thing, it's your problem, you're responsible for taking care of yourself, it completely changes how you interact with the world and what you're capable of doing. And oftentimes people will think that my chronic illness is like, oh, you know, her tummy hurts. And it's like, no, it's not quite like that. Like there's a lot of things about chronic illness that people don't understand. That's not just like, ouchie. Like it really affects everything. Even if it's just back pain, that does affect your mental health, and that affects other parts of your body. Like if your back is constantly in pain, it's definitely harder to move and to work out. So you might gain weight while you're dealing with this.
I mean, so it makes it hard to sleep, right? I mean, it can affect a lot of different things.
There's a lot of things. One of the things that I've started to have to do in the last year is buy more frozen meals and buy more cans of soup and stuff, because I can't stand and cook every night. I don't, my body cannot handle being on my feet for 45 minutes every day. There are days where I'm like, I just have to stick something in the microwave and that's dinner, because I can't do this. And that was hard for me because I've been vegan for a long time, and there's a big thing in the vegan community of like, no processed foods, be healthy. And I'm 100% a junk food vegan. Like I want to know if there are vegan chemicals in Swedish fish or not. And they're vegan. Heck yeah. But there's a lot of dismissal towards people who buy frozen fruits and vegetables, or canned fruits and vegetables, or canned meals, frozen meals kind of stuff, in especially the vegan community, but really just like the wellness community at large. As like, oh, you're not like spending that time cooking your food. And it's like, well, not everyone can do that. And there's a lot. Ableism is one of the most insidious forms of oppression that exists in our society. You know, we're aware, most of the America at this point is aware of racism on some level, not necessarily systemic, but most people are aware of personal, individualized racism. Most people are aware of individualized sexism. Ableism, on the other hand, is something that people often argue with me that doesn't exist at all. And that's just not true. Accessibility is a really important thing. And especially when we're seeing, like with this COVID pandemic, people coming out of this, able-bodied people coming out disabled, is we're seeing that our society is not built for anybody with disabilities. Those people have been living on the fringes. We've been living on the fringes for decades, centuries. And now we're just starting to get a big enough number of people who are realizing how bad we've had it for years. People are starting to realize like, oh, this is a really big issue. Accessibility is a really big issue. Like having food allergy friendly restaurants is huge. That is an ableist issue, is making food accessible. So See, that's a big shift that I have seen, is that ableism is coming more into the spotlight since the COVID pandemic, which I am happy to see, because it has been very frustrating to have to always constantly adapt my lifestyle to fit everybody else's, instead of being able to go somewhere and have my needs met. Mm-hmm. Like, I just went to the beer fest this weekend and I was like, oh, I'm going to need to bring a bunch of Cliff Bars because last time they didn't have any vegan food, but I can't go 4 hours of drinking beer without snacks. And then they were like, oh, no, we don't allow outside food. And I was like, unfortunately, they had vegan food this year, but they didn't have any vegan gluten-free food. Okay. So if it had been last year and it was the same situation, like, I would be in a lot of trouble in that moment, because they don't allow outside food, but at the same time, they're not providing food for me to eat. So what am I supposed to do? So I've spent the last 4-ish years of my life adapting my needs to everybody else's. And I'm starting to see the world kind of start to welcome me in myself, which has been nice.
Yeah, no, that's those are all, I think, yeah, you've raised a whole bunch of issues there that I think are really important. But, the whole thing with ableism, I think, is that most people kind of consider themselves to be sort of the average person. And if it's not in our experience, we tend to discount it. Might be too harsh, but we tend not to. I think it's more to just ignore it. We're not aware of it because it hasn't happened directly to us. And as I said, I've lived a very healthy life to this point, and
Well, another thing that disabled people can't do is go march in the streets.
No, but it's not.
It's not really something we can do. So it's very difficult. Like, on the one hand, you've got ableism deeply ingrained into all of society. A lot of treatment towards people with chronic illnesses is like, oh, you must have failed some way. Like, you see people who have diabetes are often told it's their own fault and they should be paying for their insulin because they just shouldn't have let that happen to them, which is just a complete misunderstanding of what it means to be diabetic, especially when it comes to type 1 versus type 2 diabetes. But that's a whole separate podcast. But people, we can't go march in the streets about it because most of us can't go walk in the streets. So it's been interesting to watch health justice really enter the spotlight over the last 2 years in this pandemic, as people have started being like, well, if you're scared of COVID, just stay home, and realizing that high risk is not a teeny tiny portion of the population, but millions and millions of people, if not billions of people.
Well, and that's yes. I mean, we've just described in a healthcare context the entire structure of our society. I mean, it is ruled largely by majorities.
Yes.
Republicans are trying to change that, but the fact of the matter is that's that things get done when they matter to enough people. And you're right. I mean, people who have been disabled, and we're fighting sort of the American iconography. The American ideal that we're all kind of taught is the independent person, the individual
Yes.
who pulls him or herself up by her own bootstraps, fully responsible for what they do, and therefore for the outcomes that happen to them. And again, we're back to the simplicity. That's a simple narrative, and it's at the core of the American culture. Is we choose the individual, which makes sense. I mean, people that left their homes in Europe and other places came, the ones who came voluntarily were the risk takers. They were the ones who were willing to say, you know what, I'm gonna put myself on a boat going, no, I don't know what's waiting for me at the other end, but it's got to be better than this, and so I'm going to do that. And
I'm sick of y'all telling me my religion's too strict. I'm going to go oppress people elsewhere.
Well, or just I'm starving here in Ireland and I need to get out because I'm going to starve if I stay here. So I'm going to get on a boat and go.
Most of those people came after it was established.
But however, yes. However,
no, I do agree with you that there's plenty of immigrants who came, and the American society, the American civil religion, is one of my favorite theories. I'm fascinated by that. Individualism is indeed a core tenet of it.
It's our culture. This is one of the tenets that we, as a culture, as a community, have. Now, whether it's true or not doesn't really matter, but that matters.
I think that's kind of the point, is that there's no way to know if it's true if it's better to be an individualist or a collectivist. And I've honestly, over the last couple of years, I've really started just to fully reject individualism, because I don't like where it's gotten us. I'm not impressed with how our society is structured. And I think a lot of that stems from this whole idea that everybody's responsible for themselves and themselves only. And I think that we do have a duty to each other. Which does bring me back actually to the question you asked me last week, which is what's our moral obligation to work? And yes, I do think we have a moral obligation to work. I think that's, yes, we owe things to each other. We owe it as a society. People working together is what makes it work. Yeah, that's my answer to that question. My issue with it in the capitalist sense is the rewarding of exploitation. But working itself, I don't think working is wrong, and I don't think work is wrong, and I don't think we need to get rid of doing work. I think we need to get rid of the way we've structured it.
But here's the question. I mean, the reason I asked that is because we talk a lot about work and your objections to it, which I understand. But work is how we contribute to our society, and we're rewarded.
Well, kind of.
No, it is. And that's a big part of, I mean, when you're spending 40 hours a week doing something that is creating value for other people in our world, then that's
one of the things,
that's your contribution.
One of the issues that I have with people phrasing work as contribution is that I feel like it really dismisses the work of being a good friend and being a good community member and volunteering to pick up trash and like stay-at-home moms. They don't have a job, but they're contributing by raising the next generation. Like that's massive. And like, I don't really view me sorting songs into different catalogs as how I'm like contributing to my society. I view the things that I do on my free time, like volunteering and creating art, as how I can contribute to my society, but there's no way for me to turn that into a paid career. And so that's where I think that like capitalism and working have gone off the trail of what I believe in. Is because what I believe in is using your talents and what you're good at and what you believe in as your contribution to society. And I don't think that at the stage of capitalism we're in now, that's almost impossible for a lot of people.
I take issue with a lot of what you just said. I think, that work is not the only contribution, but is a significant and probably the most significant contribution that we make communally is what we do in our work. Somebody is paying you to sort that sort that data because it has value to them. There's
a book. Can I cuss if it's a book title?
If you're quoting, you can, yes.
Okay, cool. So the title of this book is called Bullshit Jobs. And it's a really interesting book, and it's an examination of the BS jobs that exist. Basically the people who are pencil pushers for the pencil pushers and all of these things that are created just to keep people working. There are so many jobs, especially in the white collar sector, that just exist to keep people employed. And that's kind of, I see that as a huge problem, is because I'm like, why?
Because they create value somewhere. It's creating value.
But the point of the book is that they don't, and the book examines why these jobs don't create value.
And here's the main issue that I had with everything that you said previously, which is that you're using your judgment to substitute for a community judgment. Community is what we collectively decide. All of our individual decisions add up to a communal decision.
I didn't collectively decide on how to structure our society.
Can we finish? Can you listen to my point? We decide collectively by all making decisions individually about our own lives, and that's that combination, that aggregation of all those individual decisions helps the economy. That's how the economy distributes the resources to meet the needs of most people. So and I haven't read this book, but I will look into it. The job it's who's saying that those jobs don't create value? It's the
people who do them.
Well, maybe not. I mean, I'd have to see it's always hard.
I mean, there are books about like
read indirectly, but the point here is that we've got to be very careful about substituting our own moral and our own judgment on, what is really, in my view, we need to defer to the community, because like you, I actually think that a community is more important than the individual. The individual still has importance, though. It's not an all or nothing thing, and we have to allow room for individual contribution, individual expression, and individual effort. But we're not. But we also have to recognize that we need to work together, because that's how we live. We live together, and we need to make sure that everybody is taken care of in the best way we can for each other. And it's going to leave imperfections all over the place, but we can do a lot better. But the work thing for me is, it is important. If somebody's willing to pay you then your job has value for somebody who has that money and is willing to pay you for it. And
Yeah.
to tell somebody that your job doesn't have value because it doesn't fit with how I think value is created or the value that I see in our culture.
I mean, that's not what I'm
saying. It's a little selfish.
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
The flip side of that is, my question to you is, does a job not have value if someone's not willing to pay you for it? Like, does something you're doing not have value if someone won't pay you for it?
No, it doesn't have economic value. That doesn't mean it doesn't have value of some other place. Relationship value. I think one of the things you talked about are things that you do for friends. Yeah, there's a lot of things I like to do for friends, and I'm happy to, pick up my friend Roger and give him a ride to to when his car's being serviced to get him, to get that fixed. That's a relationship thing, and there's value there. There's not economic value. He's not, he's going to pay me by buying me a coffee or something like that, right? I mean, he's going to do something for me. But again, these aren't transactional things. These are relationship, and that's when we talk about pricing, which is something that I know a lot about because that's what I've done a lot in my career. There's relationship pricing, which means you don't get paid for every time you do something. And then there's transactional pricing, which is when you do. And no, I don't think value. I don't think money is the only way to reflect value. But I do think that it is an important one, and I think we have to. Well, I mean, the way our society is structured, and I think it's a fair way, is that people will pay more for value, for things that are valued. And so anyway, we're getting very short on time here, but I do want to recognize.
I want to respond real quick, and then we can wrap up to talking about individuals versus collective decisions. And I don't want to make the mistake of substituting my own value over what a society has decided is valuable. However, what I would say for at least American society and for most of the Western countries in the world is that the majority of public opinion is not what's shaping public policy or the way that our society is structured. The majority of public opinion is different from a lot of what the government and a lot of what the 1% is doing. So my issue with working as it exists is less on the capitalist theory side of what it means to be working and what it means to produce economic value. I understand that. I don't really have a whole lot of problems with capitalist theory. My biggest issue is that the praxis we're living in now, basically. People who have way too much money than they and their grandkids could ever spend are the ones who are deciding what jobs I get to do that are valuable and how I get to make my money and use my time, which I have a problem with because then it's an individual making a decision for the collective. And so what the issue I have with our Republican government, and I don't mean that like Republicans and Democrats, I mean that as like we're a republic, not a democracy.
No, I get it, yeah.
Is that it's very focused on individuals, and people vote for politicians not based on how much they're going to listen to their constituents, but because of what those personal politicians' views are. And I don't like that. I don't think that's a great way to structure a society. I don't think that leads to aggregate decision making, but I do agree with you that aggregate decision making is the way to go. I just don't think that that's not what I've seen in my years of life, and my experience, especially right now in working, is not that I get to make any sort of decision on what I want to do. I am very much subject to the whims of people who are much richer and more powerful than I am, which is very frustrating. And you're seeing collective movements coming up with unions, and that's why those are coming up. But like over the past 40 years, we've seen unprecedented union busting and workers' oppression. So the people who are making decisions are the CEOs, not the workers. And I think we would have a lot more fair working environments if we didn't structure our working environment in a feudal style. But I do agree with you. I think that aggregate decision making is how you get good decisions, but at least in how we are now, how our society is working at this moment, I don't really see that happening.
Yeah.
So
I disagree largely, not with a lot of the fundamental things. Yes, we're at a particular time in our in our society where corruption, which is just humans, giving into their baser instincts and using the power that they have to corrupt the systems that we have in place, to game them. And that's been going on forever. I mean, even in feudal societies, you had people that were taking advantage of other people.
The whole feudal society is people taking advantage.
It's exploitative in a sense, but the serfs were also getting something out of it. They didn't rise up for a lot of it. No, they weren't getting a ton. They weren't getting a ton, but they were getting some. I mean, they were getting some physical safety. They were getting some protection from.
I don't know if I would say physical safety, but they're getting something out of it. Yes,
they were getting protection. Physical safety meaning they didn't have marauding bands of people coming through and threatening them every 2 minutes or.
But they weren't safe from their lords.
No, well, no. This is no. They pledged fealty. I took a medieval history class once, and it was kind of interesting. The guy was talking about that, the serfs got something out of it. It wasn't a lot, but they got something out of it that was better than they'd have if they didn't. And so, I think that there's no question that we are in a point, no question in my mind that we're in a point in our history where this corruption is at a very high level, and you're getting people with means and power, and a lot of time money and power is correlated, but not always. Mm-hmm. You're getting people exerting even more influence than rich people typically have. But we've gone through periods like this in our history, and then we've recovered, and we've
the pendulum swings.
It does swing, but it's never pure, and that's the thing that I would counsel all of our young people out there is to recognize that the sausage gets made. How the sausage gets made is what we have to do, and we have to try to make it as wholesome as we can. But understand, there's going to be E. coli stuff out there that's going to get into our sausage from time to time, and that's and that's
not. I agree with you on that. I agree that I don't know if I would say that each person has the capacity. Well, I wouldn't even go that far. I wouldn't say that each person is going to be corrupt. But you get a group of people together, somebody's going to do something bad.
Use their power to
on some scale, someone's going to do something bad.
For me, corruption is using personal power for selfish reasons, for personal gain, and at the expense of so it corrupts the decision-making process of the group in that sense, and
that's a lot of what I'm seeing in our government right now, especially that I'm very frustrated by, and a lot of what I'm seeing of CEOs of massive corporations who own all the other corporations that you work at, and there's exceptions. I'm not saying every workplace is like this. And I would be remiss to say that. And that is one of the issues I have with the Abolish Work pamphlet. I like the points it makes, but it definitely doesn't account for exceptions to those. It's very final. And there are places doing good work, and there are places where there still is the traditional hierarchical setup of workplaces, but it's working well. But that's not the norm at the moment, and that's what's really frustrating to me.
I disagree. I think the exceptions are the bad actors, and they're a higher proportion than they've been in the past. But I think most companies, more than half of the companies out there, big companies, are behaving in the way they've always behaved, which is not perfect by any means, but they're not overly corrupt or overly, but there are exceptions.
That is something that we just do disagree on, but we're not going to resolve that here. But all this to come back to the big deal about chronic illness, and what makes it, being sick all the time is one battle, and that is hard enough. Yes. But the thing that's caused me to have a lot of anguish and anxiety in my chronic illness is the lack of support.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's because it's just not well understood yet. This, especially in your situation, where it is an integrative kind of, you get integrative challenges. You have many systems in your body that are compromised, and we don't have enough science, enough data.
The science is half the battle. The other half of the battle is the sick leave situation that people have at their jobs. People don't have sufficient sick leave for people to be disabled. The disability insurance that's accessible in this country is incredibly expensive, which is really hard. To be on disability pay in Tennessee, you have to be unemployed for 6 months before you can start applying for it, not even receiving checks, before you can start the application process. And that's not realistic for people who have disabilities. We have expenses for 6 months. And we can't just, I know everywhere is hiring, but it's the places that are hiring are White Castle. I can't stand on my feet for an 8-hour shift. So that's one of the things that's been very frustrating about having chronic illness for me, is just our society is not structured to be a welcoming environment or a supportive environment or a survivable environment for me. And a lot of that is, I don't think a lot of that's on purpose. I don't think that everybody in government is let's do eugenics. But I don't think it goes unchecked a lot. And this whole idea that, if you're scared of COVID, you can just stay home is a form of eugenics, which is not good. And we should not do eugenics. That's a bad thing to do. But
I think what you're describing for me is the exception, right? We're not good as people at exception processing. We're not good at finding finding ways to make things that don't fit. And right now, what you just described in a lot of different ways is, disabled people are a minority of our population. They're not a small percentage, but they are a minority, and we're not working very hard to make things work for the minority. And this is part of our culture too, this majority rules kind of thing. It's kind of like,
I would like
the minority needs to adapt, and that's unfair.
And it's something, it's going to use a little metaphor here. When I was vegan and gluten-free, I'm still vegan, not gluten-free anymore, that's what I meant. I would frequently go places that had a vegan option and had a gluten-free option. And I was like, I know gluten-free people are not going to care about being the vegan gluten-free option. And I know vegan people are not going to care about it being the gluten-free option. So why not just do the least common denominator? What I would want to see, why my perfect society that's not ableist would be a society that's built for disabled people, that able people get to have more comfortable lives in. I think the bare minimum should be what is the most suffering member of society should be what society is structured for. And if everybody else skates by, if there are freeloaders, I don't really care. I would rather have people who aren't supported be supported than be worried about the minority of people who are going to take advantage of a system like that.
Yeah, and not everybody feels that. There's this tremendous sense of fairness, and that does violate a very strong tenet that's in all of us, I think, innately, which is fairness. And if somebody's taking advantage, that's decidedly unfair, and it tends to weight more heavily than an awful lot of things out there, and people really respond badly to unfairness. And I think
what's frustrating about that though is society is unfair to me.
And I was just going to say, recasting the argument is, well, you're not being fair to the people who are disabled, because you're trying to stop. I would admittedly say welfare cheats and people that take advantage of things are a minority of people.
Absolutely, yeah.
But you're trying to control for the minority, and as a result, you're disenfranchising a lot more people because of that.
And I would
cultural public
it's
policy.
A cultural thing, and it's a big thing on American individualism too that really plays
it comes back to the individual. We get what we earn, and we rise and fall on our own merits, and we both have issues with that, but we have to make room for it, because individual expression is very important.
It is,
basic level.
As I'm approaching the extreme end of being almost anti-individualist, it's not that I don't believe that the individual is powerful or that we shouldn't, because society is still made up of a bunch of individuals. We don't take on a new form as a group. But I'm very sick of the libertarian mindset and the conservative mindset of, oh, well, I dealt with it, so I can't you. It's a misunderstanding of what it means to be human. And what I think the most beautiful thing about being human, and what a friend said to me a while back when I was thinking about leaving Tennessee, but I wasn't certain if I should, was that we're not built to fight the system. We're not built to wake up every day and go to battle. We're built to create communities and uplift each other and make beautiful things and experience. I mean, we live on an incredible planet. And the fact that we exist at all is honestly bonkers. So that's one of the things that I find so disheartening about being chronically ill, is that I often find my own individuality expressed as not worthy of survival. Yeah. But that's what it ultimately comes down to, is no, I am just as worthy as anybody else. And that's what my limits might be smaller, they might be further back than what other people have, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't respect them, and that doesn't mean I shouldn't take care of myself, and it doesn't mean I don't deserve to be taken care of.
I agree with all of that. And I think you're right that, these chronic illnesses really affect us in a lot of different ways. And they limit, it's a limiter. And in our world, in our life, things that limit you are kind of a big deal. And we do struggle in the US in particular with taking care of other people. That's in conflict with a lot of what our sort of collective essence is in this country. And it's, it's that way for a lot of reasons, starting with the kind of people that came here, those people who were willing to take individual risk. And, and then,
well, I mean, you see it. I wrote a whole paper in A Push about why the Revolutionary War wasn't justified, and I got an A, so nice. But this country was founded on people being angry that they were getting taxed without having a say in it, despite getting taxed significantly less than their British counterparts. And so while I agree with some of it and don't agree with other parts of it, I mean, our society is founded on the pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and that's where a lot of American civil religion comes from.
Exactly.
And the American civil religion is what's used largely to hurt minority communities. But
well, yeah, I mean, what happens is you start these communities off with tremendous disadvantages, and then, I mean, Martin Luther King talked about it in one of his lesser known quotes or passages. He talks about, we're behind as a Black community. We're behind, and we're behind for a lot of reasons that we didn't have anything to do with it. But the fact of the matter is we're behind, which means that we need to study harder. We need to work longer to make up the ground, because we can't get there otherwise. And that's that individualism that you just talked about is a reason, we're not extending the hand to kind of make that easier for folks.
No, we're not. And I think we should. And I think that our duty is to do that to each other. And I know you agree with me on that. I'm not trying to argue with you, because we often start in different places, but you and I often come to the same place in the end.
Yeah, I think I see that differently. I think we probably start, well, I think maybe our life experiences are giving us different places where we emphasize
we're products of very different environments also.
Yes and no, but yes, we are, from time at least, and but we still come from the same families and but
I mean, like, I'll never know what it was like to be 20 in the 80s, and you'll never know what it's like to be 20 in the 20s.
That's true. But that's only one dimension, the age thing. Culturally,
it's the age thing. There's a lot of similarities there.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, we're a family also. Just
when I say start in the same place, I mean ideologically. You and I have different means to the same ends. We both want to see the same things happen.
I agree, but I think
our opinions on how those happen is different.
Yeah, I would say that you emphasize a different starting point than I do. I think what I think is a more important starting point than you is probably where we disagree. But you're right. I mean, I think, well, it would make sense that we agree on a lot of things. And
I mean, your opinion about cats is just like wrong, but it's fine. You can be wrong about cats, and I can be wrong about pineapple on pizza. It's fine.
Indeed. All right. Well, we're very long overdue, but we do. What are we talking about next week?
Next week is going to be about
Venmo? Do we have any Venmo stuff we need?
I'm going to be real. I did drop an F-bomb in there.
Yes,
got a little fired up, and I dropped an F-bomb, and I can't.
Yeah. I was wondering if you were going to acknowledge that, so I'll wait for my Venmo to come in. This is 2 weeks.
I'm doing it right now. I know. Who am I? Honestly, I'm just going to blame it on being exhausted.
37 episodes in, and we're starting to see the true Addie.
So the true Addie cusses a lot.
I know. Believe me, I know.
That's true. I grew up with Don Lopshire, and I worked in the music business. So there's two things right there.
All of the women in my immediate family swear a lot. So
listen, it's very satisfying.
Apparently so. All right. Thank you for the Venmo.
Yes. Sent you that.
$1 at a time.
Also, I was wrong. John Adams didn't own slaves. He did have indentured servants, though. So, like, he's a half a step up.
Half a step up. Yeah, I believe that the majority of founding fathers did own slaves, because most of them came from Virginia and
most of them did. And then also John Adams specifically was told by his wife, hey, she said, don't forget the ladies, because she was very frustrated with her lack of rights in Britain. And what did he do? He forgot the ladies. So
he may not have forgotten them, but he couldn't sway the day if he tried. So I don't know that he did or not. But eventually the ladies got their voice. But
we're working on it.
Yes.
But the topic for next week is one that you'll know a little bit about. What's the big deal about breaking up and divorce?
The transition of exiting a relationship. Yes. Yes, I can opine a little bit on that.
Yeah, give me lots of tips for when Eric snores too loudly and I got to kick him out.
Hopefully that isn't the case.
And our next week will be delayed by a week because I will be busy moving in with my boyfriend.
Moving next week,
And
right?
then we'll talk about divorce.
Yeah.
The first episode in my first shared house with a significant other will be about divorce.
All right, very good.
Perfect. All right. Well, in the meantime, you can find us on awkwardfamilyconversations.com. If you want to see pictures of the adorable audio interns, you can see us on Twitter at awkwardfamilyc1. You can also find us on YouTube, also at Awkward Family Conversations, if you want to see our beautiful faces while we talk. Sadly, no cat appearances again this video. And I know you're all here for the cats. Rhett and Addie are a wonderful side effect. And for listening, you can find us on Stitcher, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, or wherever you like to listen. Last week's episode will get up soon. I totally forgot that I had that audio file, but we'll get that up this week. And probably this one while we're at it. But in the meantime, let us know what you think. I would say keep those questions and suggestions coming, but I still haven't gotten any. So please, someone question us and suggest stuff to us. We're closing in on the end of season 4. So if anybody's got any season 5 ideas, let us know what you want to hear.
Exactly.
Yep. And we'll see you next week. I love you, Dad.
Sounds good. I love you too. See you in 2 weeks, Ed.
Yes. See you in 2 weeks.
All right. Bye-bye.